Yang was left hunting after Jaune, since Blake had chosen to go after Weiss. That was okay in her books, since as angry as he was, she figured it would be easier to change his mind than Weiss's. It was probably just Blake feeling too guilty to face him. Jaune was a weird one by anyone's standards, and Yang thought no different. Sometimes he was lazy, other times active, and apparently now, he could be filled with rage too. Maybe he was pregnant. At this point it wouldn't have surprised her. Even so, despite how unpredictable he could be, Yang had no trouble finding him. It was just one of those little things you noticed. But whenever he wanted to think, he almost always took to the rooftops of Beacon, where he would sit near the edge, looking out over the area. Sometimes he would have his weapon with him too, as though he were up here to spar with someone. It was strange, but then that was him in a nutshell, wasn't it? He didn't bulge when she sat down beside him, but she knew he heard her. It was too quiet, and her footsteps echoed on the floor. His back was warm against her own as she sat cross-legged behind him, facing in the opposite direction. "Hello, Broody," she quipped. "You going to snap at me if I sit here?" He sighed, and she could hear the exhausted tone in his voice. "No." Yang hummed lightly, and she drew her knees up to her chest. She leaned back into him, leaving most of her weight to rest on his back. He held firm, of course. "You know, I do feel bad that we made you worry. Sorry about that." He cut off, and she could understand. It wasn't okay, and her apology didn't make it so. "I didn't mean to get so angry," he said instead. "I didn't mean to be such an asshole." She felt him sigh against her, and she looked up towards the bright sky with a wide smile. "I know." She grinned. "You know, it was meant to be a joke, but you are such a dad sometimes. It's weird as hell." Taiyang, my real dad, he was always trying to be the cool dad, the one you told all your friends about. Don't tell him though, but it never worked. Jaune chuckled lightly. "That didn't stop me loving him though," she went on. "And he was pretty cool, as far as dads go. It's just that it's your dad, right? They can't be cool. They're all old and stuff." "All old and stuff," he repeated. "Are you saying I'm an old man now?" This conversation took a weird turn. Yang laughed, but made sure to drive an elbow backwards to shut him up. "If you'll let me finish." She giggled. "I'm saying that even though Dad was the coolest dad you'd ever meet, that didn't mean he didn't get angry at me too. He'd sit me down on my bed, put his hands on his hips and just stare at me. I'd feel so small and stupid. Yours ever do the same?" He went silent for a while, and she wondered if something she said had been wrong. "I don't remember," he whispered, and the words sounded melancholy. He must have though. Lately it's been my mum more. "Your family really loves you," she said, with a quick smile at the memory of summer. "You're lucky to have them." "I am," he agreed. "I'll never take that for granted again." "Again?" She shook her head and pushed on. "And you know that even when they're upset and shouting at you, it's not like they don't love you anymore. In fact, they're only able to shout like that because of how much they love you." He sighed, and for the first time, she felt him lean back against her. "I know." The weight that rested on her shoulders lifted, replaced now by his. But it was a more comfortable one and she enjoyed it. Her lips quirked into a smile, and she laughed into her knees. "Even if it's not real, this team does feel like a family. I mean, that's what it's supposed to feel like. But I always imagined it would be more having new siblings. Weiss is just too naggy to be a sister though, and you're all overprotective dad to me and Blake." "I don't mean to be." "Nah, it's fine. I kinda like it." "Undiscovered fetish?" She dug her elbow back into his kidney. Don't kill the mood. And no, it's more like I always grew up being the mum with Ruby, ever since Summer died. Dad tried his best, and did a damn good job too. But he had to provide for us, and that meant work. Crow, our uncle, came round when he could, but Crow is... She tried to think of a polite way to put it. What I'm trying to say is, sometimes I had to be the one to step up and wash clothes, to kiss Ruby's boo-boos better, while dusting off my own skinned knees and fighting back tears. And now you're pretending you're the daughter of a 17-year-old man? I'm saying... She flushed. That I like how I don't have to be the one to feel responsible for other people. I like how you and Weiss look out for us, and how I can focus on just being a normal girl for once. I mean, as much as I love Ruby, it's also nice how she's on another team, and she's thriving there too. I get to just totally relax, to be me. I am happy for you, Yang. The weird thing was, as casually as he said that, it didn't leave a doubt in her mind as to his honesty. He was happy for her, and that felt natural. Yang pushed up, the action so sudden that he almost fell back, but she turned and wrapped her arms over his shoulders before he could. She knelt behind him, with her hands loosely clasped over his chest, and her chin resting on his right shoulder. I think Blake feels the same way too, she whispered into his ear. I doubt she'll ever admit it, not unless we get her drunk, but she probably likes how normal you make her feel when she used to have all that stress and fear before. She felt his chest rise and fall beneath her hands, and also his long sigh. She's sorry too, you know. I know. She didn't mean to break that promise you made, and it's really tearing her up. Yang continued when he didn't get angry. I know she's got her thing with the White Fang, but the real reason she brought us was because she was worried about you. The thought of you being hurt, it was too painful for her to bear. She closed her eyes and smiled. Probably as painful as it was for you when you found out what we did. I don't hate her for it. There was a hitch in his voice. She knows. Yang grinned and stole his own words. Still feels crap about it though. I'll fix things. I know you will. She said. You always do. Just take a little time to fix yourself as well, alright? I know you got angry because you were worried about us, but we only did that because we were worried about you. I like our team. I really like our team. So I don't want to see it torn apart. He nodded, and although there was no verbal promise, it still felt like some progress was made. On the other hand, it was the easy progress, and she knew it wouldn't continue like that. About Weiss, she began. Can we not? He sighed. She managed to get under my skin more than I expected. Not more than I expected, Yang thought. She hummed instead of speaking. However, as she listened to him mutter angrily to himself, it was pretty much how Blake had said. Both of them were too stubborn to back down. You know, she said cautiously, Weiss only got angry because she was worried about you. I get that, he said, but it doesn't change the fact that she should have thought things through. That fight, Torchwick, it's not over when he runs away. He's not going to forget it. I know, but she did her best, you know? Her best wasn't... He cut himself off with an angry sigh. He shook his head and whispered to her, I'm not out to make her feel bad. I just wanted her to understand, to see where she'd gone wrong and to realize why I was so upset. If she just admitted and accepted it. You realize this is Weiss we're talking about. Yang deadpanned. She's too proud to say something like that. Pride comes before a fall. He mumbled. He cut off with another sigh, but Yang's eyebrow quirked up as a slow smile spread over her face. Well, Blake had said she would deal with Weiss, alright? If you want her to understand, then you need to tell it to her straight. She said. You think I don't know that? She won't listen when she's angry. Yang nodded. She was spitting up a storm earlier. It was probably a good job you left when you did, or she had summoned her locker. That sounds like her. That temper of hers could get her killed. She could stand to chill out a little and not be so demanding. Exactly. Well then, Yang grinned. Tell her to her face. I would. He sighed, but not until she apologizes. She has to accept that what she did was wrong. She can't just go about like that and act like it's all okay. Funny you should mention that, Yang said. Blake went to have a word with her, and, well, let's just say she's managed to get through Weiss's fixed skull. She really hoped Blake had come through on her end. Jaune sighed and sat on the desk. His eyes traced the classroom he waited within, noting the seats covered with dust and the blackboard off to one side. Beacon had many such classrooms, some that went unused, or maybe they were just spares in case of renovations or damage. This one looked like it hadn't been used in some time, a perfect place for what was probably going to be a private meeting. A heavy weight settled in his stomach as he waited for Weiss to arrive, as Yang had promised she would. He couldn't say he expected the blonde to seek him out so soon, or even want to talk to him at all, but maybe that was just another example of how mature she really was, that she could put aside how she felt for the betterment of her team. Over 1,000 years, and sometimes he could still act like a spoiled child. It was kind of pathetic, really. At least it would be sorted out now. His chest itched, and he rubbed at the bandages hidden beneath his shirt to try and make the feeling go away. Those would need to be changed soon, and maybe it would be small enough now that he didn't need them. Either way, one good side to his tirade that morning was that they'd all been far too emotional to notice anything. He made sure to wear a shirt to bed anyway. No use taking any foolish risk. The door to the classroom creaked open, and Blake and Yang could be seen talking on the other side. Blake looked behind her and motioned forward, and the angry face of his partner appeared in the doorway a moment later. Yang pushed her in, and the door was quickly shut behind her, giving them some privacy. Jaune sighed, but firmed his resolve as he stood and walked over to her. Each step felt difficult, as equal parts guilt and anger burned away inside him. Eventually, he stood before her, arms at his side. Weiss crossed her own and glared up at him, her lips sat in a defiant scowl. It was a patterned Weiss-Schnee expression, and nothing she hadn't worn before. Her pale eyes scanned him up and down, before they crooked up an almost expectant look. Well? She said. His eyes narrowed and he instinctively mirrored her pose, arms crossed. Well, what? He asked. I'm waiting for you to apologize. Me? Weiss laughed. You must be joking. I came here to receive yours, and, in case you're wondering, you can deliver it on one hand and knee. Not going to happen. Then why waste my time? She asked. Why tell me you wanted to apologize if you're just going to be a stubborn fool? Confusion, along with a small sliver of doubt, started to worm its way inside him. His arms loosened, and his eyes trailed over her head and towards the door. But Yang said you wanted to apologize, he whispered. What? Weiss snapped and flicked her head to one side, so that her white hair slapped against his chest. Blake said it was you that wanted to... She trailed off and turned to look at the door as well, as if summoned by their very thoughts. There was a soft click from outside, and a muffled giggle. He pushed past Weiss and reached for the door, only to frown as it rattled but didn't open. It felt like there was something on the other end blocking it, but the lock was on the inside. He tried it, to no avail. Yang? He called as he banged his fist on the door. Very funny, Yang. Now open the door." "Nope." Her muffled voice came through the woodwork, along with what sounded like her laughter. There were other people too, and not just Blake by the sound of it. No doubt Ruby and her team as well. "You're not allowed out until you solve things between you two." "Yang!" Weiss shouted as she appeared beside him. She pushed at the door as well, before scowled and delivered a fierce kick against it. The sturdy door held, no doubt reinforced for that very purpose. "I swear, Yang," she growled, "if you don't open that door, you'll regret it." "Blake and I don't want you to get a divorce," Yang shouted in a teasing tone. "We don't want another mummy. Now kiss and make up." "If you don't open the door, I'll not only do worse than I did the other day," Jaune threatened, "but I'll record the whole thing and spread it all over Beacon." There was actually applause from outside, as the blonde no doubt considered the horror of what that would entail. After a few seconds, she replied, "I'll take my chances. This is more important than a little bit of embarrassment. Now, we're going to go for a walk and give you guys some privacy. We'll be back in 10 minutes, and you better have made up by then." Through the door, they could hear the sounds of footsteps and the conversations drifting away. Given like that, not going to happen. Jaune slammed a shoulder against the door. It held, and didn't even budge. With a growl, he threw his arms into the air and stalked back to the desk and sat down on top of it. Fine. If she wanted to play that game, he would play. No one could go through what he had and not learn a little patience. While Yang was notoriously absent in it, she'd get bored soon enough, and he was more than willing to wait her out. He should have known better than to trust her, but she played with his emotions and wrapped him around her finger. Weiss appeared less willing to wait, for the heiress continued to rant and spout threats towards Yang, Blake, and whoever was out there helping them. She slapped her hand against the door over and over, and at one point even looked like she might try and claw the door to pieces. She was without her weapon, however, as was he, and so they didn't really have an answer. "Give it up," he called out. "The door's going to hold no matter how nastily you insult its parentage and upbringing." Weiss rounded on him immediately, no doubt thrilled to have a new target to focus her anger on. "Oh really?" She said, "I suppose you know all about giving up, wouldn't you?" Mr. Lazybones himself, with a side order of hypocritical moron, wants to go and offer me some advice. Unlike you, I think I'll actually try and do something to improve the current situation. You can continue sitting there looking like a petulant child. Petulant? He laughed. "I suppose you know all about that, wouldn't you, princess? If you want to talk about childish, maybe we should look at the insults. They're very mature. Hardly insults if they're true." Weiss bristled. "Besides, if you're going to act like a fool, it's up to someone to warn you before you make a mistake. Like the one you made." He rose to his feet. "Like taking the team into a situation you knew nothing about. Like risking their lives and your own for something as stupid as stopping a petty criminal." Weiss raised an eyebrow as he walked up to tower over her. If she felt intimidated by the towering height he had over her, she didn't show it. But in truth, they both knew she wasn't one to be frightened by such things. "And there's that hypocrisy again," she taunted. "When it's you who ran around with Blake doing it behind our backs. If you're trying to make me feel guilty, you might want to wash the same sin off yourself. I knew what I was doing, like you did at the docks." Weiss hissed, and this time it was he who backed away as she thrust a finger into his chest and pushed him back. "I didn't say anything at the time, but you do know what it was like for us to find you broken and barely alive in the middle of that inferno." She cut him off with the most ferocious snarl he had ever heard from the girl. "We arrived in time to see you looking like you were dead, and Blake stood atop your body as some psycho girl tried to kill you. We may have gone out behind your back last night, but at least we came back in one piece. It was you who didn't do the same." So don't lecture us about this, and don't you dare act like you're the only one who has the right to feel angry. He hadn't even thought of it, hadn't even realized. I don't, he growled. This isn't the same. Like hell it isn't. She said, it's the exact same thing, except we did it better. And yet even when you came back looking like you fought Nevermore and lost, we didn't feel the need to shout and scream at you. Anger surged within him and he bit back a growl. He knocked her hand aside and stepped into her guard, so that they stood chest to chest. I'm not going to apologize for what happened at the docks. I'll do it again if Blake were in danger. Weiss whipped her hand back and slapped it against his chest. It wouldn't have normally done any damage, but it hit his wound dead on and made him wince. She was so angry, however, that she didn't notice. And I'm not going to apologize for the same, she howled. None of us are, and we'll do it again if you were in danger, you stupid dunce. The energy seemed to drain out of her, and although she slammed her fist into his chest once more, it was a weak hit at best. She didn't look at the floor, however, but rather kept her blazing eyes locked onto his. You can't do one thing and expect us not to do the same, she added, this time in a calmer voice. You can be angry all you want, but we're not going to say sorry for giving a damn about a teammate. Would you? Would you? She repeated. Energy fled him as his shoulders dropped. He knew the answer as much as he wouldn't admit it, and that fact seemed to drain the anger that had fueled him. He wouldn't have apologized in her place, and even now he wouldn't apologize for what had happened at the docks. Yes, he had been hurt, but he would do it again if he had to. It would be like asking him to apologize for saving his mother, and that was something he would never do. Weiss no doubt caught the meaning of his silence, for she snorted and looked away. I thought so, she whispered. Silence opened up between them, and despite that they stood so close, it felt like the distance was larger than that. He felt cold and distant, like he pushed everything away and now had nothing to hold on to. I won't apologize, he said stubbornly, and neither will I. Something unpleasant swam in his gut. He let out a soft sigh and looked up towards the ceiling. I will say sorry though, he whispered, and he heard her intake of breath. I'm sorry for some of the things I said this morning. I still don't agree with what you all did, but I was wrong to suggest you would have purposely hurt Yang or Blake. He felt something poke his chest, and when he looked down to see it was Weiss digging a finger into his breastbone. She looked angry, but this time her eyes were fixed on his neck. That was out of line, she mumbled. I wouldn't do that. Her body was warm as he carefully placed his hands on her back. He wasn't sure if she would pull away, but against all odds she allowed him to draw her in for a weak hug. I know you wouldn't. I was angry and irrational. I didn't mean any of it. I just wanted to hurt you. You did, she growled. More than anything else, that made me angry. I'm sorry. I like my team. I wouldn't do something like that. I'm sorry. I'm not like my father. She wasn't. Not at all. He tightened his arms around her a little and sighed. I know. I meant what I said before. She mumbled. I would die before I let anything happen to them. And like before, that sentence made his gut clench. She looked away. I wanted to come back having finished this and let you know we managed to do it. I imagined you being relieved to have time to rest, that you would thank us and be happy that I'd gone out of my way to help. I thought if I helped Blake, and we were able to stop it all together, that you'd be able to calm down and stop pushing yourself. I thought I was helping you. Gods. The words cut straight through him and left his heart heavy in his chest. I'm sorry, he whispered, yet again. But I guess I'm sorry too, she sighed. I shouldn't have gotten angry and shouted back, though in my defense, you were being an absolute idiot. He chuckled but didn't say anything. It was just like Weiss to deliver an apology and then take it straight back. At least it had been said, and he would remember that. I guess I was. And maybe I shouldn't. Even if I'd done the same thing again, I could have let you know. I could have forced Blake to wait until you were better, until we could all go together as a team. It was perhaps irresponsible of me to not make you aware. She sighed and looked to the side. Her cheeks darkened a little, as though embarrassed to admit she had gotten something wrong. In the future, I'll be sure to do that. She said, take that as a promise. I will, he whispered. They'd gone behind his back, which wasn't the real problem here. It was that they'd gotten in the way of his plans, that they ruined his hard work and drawn attention to themselves. But was that really their fault? They didn't have the bigger picture and they simply didn't know any better. Everything they'd done, they had done with the same concern he had for them. Lifetime after lifetime, dedicated to protecting them, and they had simply chosen to do the same in return. Their intent had only ever been kindness, and perhaps, somewhere along the way, that intent had started to feel less important to him, paling in the faces of results, in cold, hard fact. But it did matter, even if it was this life he'd come to recognize that once more. His family, the ones back in Ansel, who offered nothing to his goals of saving Beacon, but filled him with love and joy regardless. And his friends and team here, who he had begun to fall in love with, all over again. In a strange way, perhaps he had forgotten that, forgotten the people and what they meant, the personalities and emotions behind the faces of a group of people he had to save. I won't ever forget that again. So, he whispered, as he smiled down at his partner. Are we? You are forgiven. Weiss poked him in the chest as she glowered at him. I have done nothing wrong, but have denied to accept your apology and offer a tentative peace treaty of my own. Her proud eyes refused to meet his as she looked away. I would suggest you take it. Of course, Lady Weiss. He rolled his eyes and earned another poke for it. Thank you for having the dignity to accept the apology of one so lowly as myself. I suppose I should apologize to the others too. Some of the things I said, they were out of line. She agreed. But you can save the apology for another time. Not now? Jaune blinked and looked down on her in confusion. Weiss's smile was anything but friendly, and in fact, would have sent most people running. Our daughters? She hissed the word, seemed to think it would be amusing to lock us in a classroom together on the pretense that the other was prepared to apologize. I don't know about you, but I am feeling less than forgiven for their trickery. His lips drew into a thin line as he glowered over her head. You could just imagine the look on Yang's face. Her smug, shit-eating grin as she locked the door shut and laughed with Ruby and Nora. Oh yes, he wouldn't say no to a little revenge there himself. I'm sure if you put your mind to it, you could think of something unfortunate to happen to them. Weiss's words were so sugar-coated, his teeth almost rotted. Yet at the same time, he couldn't stop the slow grin that spread across his lips. Oh, I can think of a few things, he crooned. It had been a while since he'd done anything like that, hadn't it? Oh yes, it looked like Weiss was on to a good idea with this one. It would also be something he could do at the same time as interfering with Cinder. 3 birds with 1 stone, as it were. For Blake was just as guilty in this, he was sure. It would have taken a certain kind of manipulation to trick Weiss into this, and that had Blake Belladonna written all over it. I take it you'll be extracting your own pound of flesh, my lady? Weiss's smile was dazzling, and also very shark-like. She flicked her head back, and the action sent her ponytail wafting before his nose. "Of course," she said. "It would be dreadfully remiss of me to leave their punishment to you. After all, I did say I would help you become a better team leader. You did, and I would certainly use some lessons on dealing with naughty teammates. Maybe the kind of lessons that would be best given by example. It's the best way to learn, and I suppose we'll just have to practice over and over until you get it done. I'm feeling rather dim lately. You might need to keep showing me. I'll be patient with you." The two of them shared a long look before they began to laugh. "And to think, they wanted us together again," he said. "We'll make them regret it," Weiss promised. As though they heard the words being spoken, the lock on the other side of the door clicked open. Weiss pushed away from him, though not far enough that she left his arms. No doubt she realized if Blake and Yang didn't see some evidence of improvement, they'd just lock the door again. Jaune shook his head in amusement as his hand slipped down Weiss's back to rest on the back of her hips. Oh, they'd play along for now, but the moment those two were in the arm's reach, it would be time for some quick vengeance. The door opened, and as they made to speak, there was a bright flash of white that obscured their vision, followed by the sound of a scroll's camera clicking. "Do you mind?" Weiss snapped as she blinked past the light. If Yang thought a little blackmail material was enough to stop him, she'd be sorely disappointed. The two of them were going to rule this day. But apparently, not as bad as he was. For as the spots faded from his eyes, he saw that it was not Yang and Blake on the other side, or rather, they were there, but stood guiltily behind a few adult figures. Osmond raised an eyebrow at the sight of them, while Galinda shook her head and mumbled something about him picking up another one. It wasn't their eyes which he found his own locked onto, however, nor was it Crow's, who whistled from behind, all too amused as he lowered his scroll. No. It was the blue eyes of a white-haired woman, who stared at the two of them with wide eyes and a horrified expression. Winter Snee opened her mouth, and then, for the first time ever, didn't seem capable of forming words and had to close it again. Then again, she wasn't the only one. Winter? Weiss stammered as she glanced between her older sister and himself, whose chest she was still resting her hands upon, and he who had his own wrapped around her waist. She shoved him aside and turned to her sister, but the damage was already done. I didn't know you were coming to Beacon." She let out a brittle laugh. "It's so good to see you." Heh, Crow grinned. "I'm so glad I brought my camera."